Hey everyone, and welcome to my review of the M1 MacBook Pro. In this video, what I'm going to do is go through all of the things that I like, so all the good first, and then I'll go through some of the things that I don't like, and then just a little summary at the end as well in terms of my thoughts. So what I want to do is, because this is going to be quite a long video, I want to just crack on straight away. So the first category is the design. So as most people have commented, obviously these M1 MacBook Pros are essentially brand new in the inside, but on the outside they are pretty much the same as what we've seen for quite a few years. So it has a few limitations. So in terms of the ports, you have your ports on your left hand side, which is just two USB-C ports. You have your headphone jack on the right hand side, and that is about it in terms of the design on the outside. Thoughts on the design are that it feels expensive. So it's not a massively heavy laptop, but it has enough of a weight to it where if you are using this on your lap, it's not going to move about or shake quite easily when you're actually typing or anything like that. In order to open it up, you literally just lift from that front section, and I found it does move a tiny bit, but not enough to where your normal laptops have to actually be held down. If you are using this on your lap, then generally you can get away with actually just opening it with a single finger. So in terms of everything on the inside, I will go into more depth in terms of the keyboard and everything separately, but initially, obviously the design, the screen, it's got relatively thick bezels in comparison to what you're getting in 2020 and obviously any newer sort of models that are coming out, but that for me isn't really an issue. I like the way that it looks, and I've got no real problems with the design apart from the fact that I would have liked more USB-C ports, but I'll come on to that in a second. The next category is the screen. So the screen itself is the best laptop screen I've ever used, and it's as simple as that. So I generally don't like using laptops for the simple, and also PC monitors, for the simple reason that I get a lot of eye fatigue very quickly from using LED or else LCD type screens. The flicker or the the non-reflective coating that they actually apply to it, it really doesn't suit my eyes. I get really bad headaches just from literally a couple of hours of using those types of screens. Now with this particular screen, I have used this non-stop since I've had it, and I don't get any eye fatigue. I'm perfectly happy at the end of the day having used this for several hours, and I mean several hours at a time. The screen for me is brilliant, and yes, there may be other screens out there or laptops out there that actually look better in terms of having a higher screen to body ratio, but at the end of the day, the main thing that matters is what it actually looks like, the colors that it reproduces, and also how it actually reacts in terms of reflections and things like that. And whilst most people won't like it, it works quite well for me. Similar thing to my OLED TV, where it doesn't have that really anti-glare sort of coating on it, and I actually prefer that. I'd prefer trying to isolate a few odd sharp bits of reflection, because that you can actually manage yourself, as opposed to having that anti-reflective coating that basically just creates a sheen across the whole panel, and then basically it dulls down what you're watching anyway, so you're never really getting the true reflection of what it is that you're doing. So obviously for things like video editing and color corrections and things like that, it's not very good in that sense. Right, so coming on to the next category, and that is the speakers. The good thing about the MacBook Pro is you have your speakers just on either side, just here, and they are stereo speakers, and for a laptop, these are by far the best speakers I've ever personally heard. I've had quite a few laptops down the years, not personally, as I said, I don't personally like using laptops normally, but for friends, family, and also the kids, and I've even purchased some where I've gone for them because they've been advertised with having stereo audio or hi-fi speakers soundstage, and once you actually get them, they sound very tinny, very high-pitched. They may have very sharp high-end notes, but everything else is basically just non-existent. The difference with these particular speakers is you get a much wider soundstage, so obviously you're not going to get rumble and you're not going to get deep bass, but what you do get is decent mids and very good highs, and that is very good for editing and things like that, and also just general viewing as well. I personally, if I'm doing anything editing wise or watching a movie or anything like that, generally I will put on headphones, and that's something that I'll come on to. But for the speakers that are built in for just short viewing periods, maybe just a YouTube video, something like that, they're very, very good for that. So the speakers, definitely a thumbs up. Coming on to the keyboard and the trackpad. The keyboard itself, I'll start with that. And once again, this is the best keyboard I've ever probably typed on, and I mean the best ever. I've had a lot of jobs, I've done a lot of office jobs in the past, and I've had a lot of personal keyboards on my PCs that I used to build. I'm not one that likes a lot of travel, so I don't need mechanical keyboards and things like that to actually make it comfortable for me. I tend to prefer a shorter throw, but obviously I think we've been quite lucky in the sense that we've lost the whole palaver of the butterfly keyboard, and we've gone back to the traditional type of switch, and these keys are they're just the perfect amount of travel, and it's so easy to actually type on this. And the amazing thing about this is it's easy to type on it even when it's on your lap, even when you're using the trackpad and everything. It's just a very, very good keyboard. For anybody out there that hasn't actually experienced it, just go into an Apple store once things go back to normal, and just have a quick type on it, because I think most people will agree, apart from the people that are really just into their mechanical keys, this typing experience is very, very good. And then obviously, because it being a laptop, I have used this in bed at night at times, and that's where the shorter throw and you do get a little bit of sound from the space bar. I think that's probably the loudest. Whereas most of the keys tend to have a more dulled down kind of sound, which is better for not disturbing your partner whilst basically using it late at night. Coming on to the trackpad, a lot has been said about the fact that you no longer have your function keys as normal, and that instead you've got this touch bar. I'll come on to the trackpad in a second. So the touch bar along the top. Now, I'm not one of those that wants the function keys back. I say get rid of it and leave it gone, because if you want function keys, you just hold that and you have your function keys. So you have your F1s through to F12. I love the touch bar for the simple reason that it is adaptive. We need to move on as things progress, and we've seen over the recent years where manufacturers of laptops have come out with dual screens, where your middle screen is essentially what the touch bar is, and it basically gives you in certain apps more functionality. So for example, most of the use cases have been very gimmicky in the sense that the only real places they benefited you on other implementations is video editing perhaps, and when watching movies and things like that. And what it does do is it gives you a sort of timeline along their section, which is very similar to what the touch bar does as well. Obviously, just on your normal homepage, you have your basic ones for screen layouts and things like that, and then you can expand this and have that expanded. And similar thing with, say, your volume controls and things like that, where if you go into your normal one and you click on this, that will stay there until you get rid of it. So if you want to just quickly make minute amendments, you can just do that quickly. I do leave auto brightness enabled. I don't actually mind that. I think it works quite well. And generally, if you look at the brightness that I've got it set to, at the moment, obviously, because I've got the lights blazing at it, it's bright full. Usually, I'll actually have it about there. So without these lights, it should give you an idea in terms of how well that actually works and how bright the screen is. The fact that I can actually have it turned down just lower than half generally, and it'll actually perform really, really well. So the touch bar for me, I love it. I absolutely love it in editing. I love it in movies and things like that, whenever you've got that timeline, and also for just general prompts as well. So whenever you're in certain apps, anything that pops up on screen, you also have a little prompt pop up here. So for example, when you're doing a compound clip in Final Cut Pro, it'll bring up a sort of prompt saying this will now turn it into a compound clip. Do you want to continue? Yes or no, whatever. And if you're used to editing with your hands on the keyboard and using shortcuts, what you don't really want to do is move it away and actually have to navigate the mouse pointer. So what that does is it allows you to keep your hands on the keyboard and literally just hit yes or no. And it's very similar in other apps as well, so it will do a very similar thing. As I said, obviously I've got the names mixed up at the start. The trackpad, coming on to the trackpad, and I've said this before in previous videos that I don't like trackpads on laptops, and generally I'll actually use a cheap Bluetooth mouse or something like that on the side instead. This changes that. Now this is the best trackpad I've ever used, and it's uncanny. You would swear that this trackpad is moving when you click it, and it doesn't matter where you click it, top right, top left, in the middle. It gives you this haptic feedback that is unparalleled on any device apart from the Apple Watch and with the digital crown. So apart from this, the sort of instant sort of feel. I think the closest thing I could actually tell you would be a very early derivative of this would have been the home button on the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, where they got rid of the physical key and they replaced it with that sort of haptic feedback, and that was good. This is just miles better. This is so far ahead of that you would not be able to tell. Like, I literally had to put my ear against it to test whether I could hear anything, and obviously because it does the sound as well, it makes a very, very faint click. That even if you've got system sounds and everything turned down, you still get that click, especially if you've got headphones on. And it's just very, very convincing, and it makes your brain think that yes, you are clicking onto a physical sort of button. So it makes the whole experience seamless. And it makes it so then it doesn't really feel like you're just scrolling across a piece of glass that doesn't move. You're actually touching something that is actually clicking in. And because it's not moving, it means that whether you click here, whether you click here, whether you click here, whether you click here, the feeling is exactly the same. And I think that's the biggest flaw with most trackpads out there, the fact that it's not consistent. So depending on where you actually click on it, you'll actually get a slightly different sort of pressure response. And that's what this does so well compared to everything else. I mean, I don't need to tell you too much on the trackpad, because just about every video out there on MacBooks will tell you exactly the same. That trackpad is the best that's probably out there. Right, so keyboard and trackpad and touch bar are done. So coming on to speed. So speed is one of those kind of things that you can throw benchmarks at it, and you can check to see what the Geekbench and everything is and things like that. But generally when it comes to laptops, even very, very fast laptops, so I've had laptops in the past that I've purchased where when they're brand new, and this obviously this whole video I have to premise it by saying that I am a Windows user. I have used Macs in the past, nothing as new as macOS even 10. So I didn't even use Mac OS X. It would have been probably older than that where I've actually made use of them in any type of long-term sort of testing or use case scenarios. So for the most part, I am a Windows user. So coming from Windows, most laptops that you can buy, and generally people will buy in the sort of ballpark of around £400 to maybe £800 here in the UK, unless you're using it for a particular purpose. So for example, if you're buying a gaming laptop or something like that, then they're probably going to end up being a lot more. But most people, if you're into PCs and Windows, you're not going to buy a laptop for gaming. You're going to build yourself a PC. So in terms of speed, generally I've never really expected a lot from laptops, because they can't do it. They can't perform at the levels that even the cheapest PC that you build for £200-300 can. So when you're buying a laptop, the only thing that you're really buying for is portability. So from that point of view, in the past, the main thing that's actually kept me off buying any type of MacBook has always been the chips. And it's always been the fact that firstly, they're normally a generation behind. And secondly, the fact that whatever you buy will be outdated so quickly that the performance, even if it's right top tier, firstly, you're going to have to pay a heck of a premium for it, and secondly, it will drop off very, very fast. Now, Mac OS obviously differs in that sense, where it seems to, similar to iOS and iPad OS and all the rest of them, they seem to perform a lot better because everything is unified. It's all built by Apple, so it's a lot easier for them to actually factor in everything and try and optimize everything to the best of their ability. But essentially, the speed on this device, as people have said, it is just something else. It boggles your mind as to what you can throw at this and it just perform. Like it literally, nothing I've thrown at it has actually been able to cause this a major issue. Now I've had use cases where I have seen the beach ball, and generally that's when I'm working with this particular type of iPhone footage. I'm working with 10-bit 4K 60 Dolby Vision content, and I'm layering titles and maybe dual layers on top of that, then yes, that will cause it to beach ball. But the biggest sort of drawback when it comes to video editing and those kind of intensive tasks is usually rendering. And that's where this particular device just blows everything else out of the water. Like I've used iPhones and iPads in recent years for the simple reason that the rendering side of those devices is just so optimized that it makes you think that you must be getting something that is below par. Like the output, the video output file, the end result must be worse in some way. And initially when I actually got this, I actually tested with Final Cut Pro set to standard sort of rendering speeds. and then I set it to fast encode, and I actually checked both of those, and for me personally, I could not see the difference. I could not hear the difference. There's virtually, for me, I mean, I know there must be something different, but the end result looks exactly the same for me in my initial tests. So what that means is I can literally throw this on fast encode and encode files faster than I've ever been able to, whilst throwing a lot more layers and a lot more complexity at it at the same time. Now, alongside speed is obviously the other biggest thing about this particular laptop, and that is the battery life. So if I just pull this up and we take a look at battery preferences, and what we'll do is we'll go to usage history and we'll go for the last 10 days. Now, I've charged this last night, but previously to that, I'd actually used it from roughly around the 19th of December through till yesterday, which was the 22nd of December. I've used it for video editing, and then I've rendered out all those videos. So all of the videos that you would have seen on my channel in between those times were rendered using this particular device. As well as that, I've actually been testing a lot of external plugins for Final Cut Pro, and for that I've done a lot of sort of small exports where I've just been testing out how to get certain things to look right, and for basically standard definition text layers to actually export in high definition. And because of that, obviously I've had massive amounts of actual usage. Most of that probably won't be reflected just on this simple chart. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but as I said, because I'm still pretty new to macOS, it's not something that I'm straight away looking into. And to be perfectly honest, I know other people have all sorts of setups where they'll have their fan temperature and things like that up here, and the CPU temperatures. I personally don't like those kind of things because generally they're just making use of resources that you can use elsewhere. So for me personally, that's not something that I'm really interested in. But in terms of battery life, this is an all-day laptop without any question. Like, if you use this light, you could probably get through a week's worth of usage with this. If you're a heavy user like I am, then you can easily render out long videos. I'm talking the 30-minute LG soundbar video that I did. That was rendered out on this particular laptop, and that was done without plugging in. At no point during that whole video editing and exporting did I actually have it plugged in. So in terms of battery life, it's just crazy good. That is all that I can say about it, basically. Right, coming on to the next topic, which is the M1 side of things. So initially, obviously, when I first got this, there wasn't really very much showing up, but for me personally, it was actually quite a big one, where if we come into the apps and we scroll across, as you can see, I've got LumaFusion, I've got a few other things like IPTV Smarters, some of my other apps as well. But basically, LumaFusion is the big one that I basically wanted, because what this does is it means that you can actually do the same thing that I would have done on an iPad. So for example, LumaFusion was the biggest one. That was the thing that I used to use for all my videos up until this point, both YouTube as well as all the sort of home videos that I used to make with the kids on birthdays and things like that. So the fact that we can support basically all the M1 apps, and recently they've actually had another update as well. So I believe it was 11.1 update. If we just load LumaFusion, what you'll see now is originally this would only open in this sort of window. What you can now do is obviously expand into full screen and then just switch between various desktops. So in terms of the M1 apps, for my personal subjective sort of experience, it's been very, very good. Now LumaFusion itself did have a few little niggles, and none of those were really deal breakers or anything, because all that was happening was whenever you use LumaFusion, it'd operate exactly as it would on an iPad or an iPhone. But when you went to actually export the file, it would bring up an error message saying something failed, but it would still actually export. And I believe I actually tested uploading straight to YouTube with it as well, and that also worked as well. Just as a side note, I'm going to be doing another video. I didn't want to include in this because it would have been even longer than it already is going to be, but I'm going to do a video in terms of the best way to actually deal with iPhone footage on these various apps, and basically it's different settings that you can use in order to upload to YouTube actually in HDR and have that video playable on both a HDR as well as an SDR display. So obviously anybody who's subscribed to the channel will know I've done a lot of test uploads recently since the 12s came out, and some of those worked, some of them didn't. And obviously as soon as I got this device, that was one thing that I wanted to have a little play about with, and I've figured out a few different ways in order to both firstly upload, but then also be able to get any SDR content to show correctly on a HDR timeline. So that will be a different video. If that video is already out at the time you're watching this, then what I'll do is I'll put a card in the top right and you can just click on that and it will take you straight to that video. So coming on to something that is very subjective for me personally. So obviously you can see I have Final Cut Pro, I have LumaFusion, and then if we go into the apps, I also have iMovie as well. Where's iMovie gone? Just there. So yeah, the icon's different on the MacBook. So I now have 3 editing apps that I can actually use in order to actually produce and edit video from the iPhone 12, and all of these are capable of actually exporting that HDR footage. So that's something that for me personally I really like. Obviously I'm coming from just using my phone or my iPad where I basically had LumaFusion. iMovie on the phones wasn't really good enough for me. It didn't really have enough layers and different sorts of tricks that I could use to get it to do similar to what Final Cut Pro can do for me now on an iPhone. I think I've been very resourceful in how I used LumaFusion up until this point in order to get it to do things that it probably wasn't designed to do, and it basically mimicked what a standard video editing software was capable of doing. Not all the way obviously, but it does give me a lot more options. So in terms of app choices, that's something that I really like, and obviously this is before we even delve into DaVinci Resolve and other editing apps out there. To be perfectly honest, I probably won't even look into any of those because I'm so happy with the way that Final Cut Pro works for me that is probably the editing software that I'm actually going to be using going forward. Now just a side note on that is continuity in terms of these particular various editing softwares, and it's all your little shortcuts. So Command and B being the blade tool in order to basically snip or cut a track on your timeline. Those kind of shortcuts seem to work between every single one of the apps, and that's something that I really like and have found basically just makes it even better in terms of just switching between them and playing about and just testing things basically. Okay, so the next one is basically continuity with other devices. So when I got my Apple Watch, I really like the feature where if I have my phone nearby, I don't need to put in the pin once you've added cards onto your watch. You just unlock your phone and it unlocks your watch for you. And similarly, whenever you have your watch next to you, you can put your laptop down, your MacBook down, you can come back to it, open it up, and it'll actually just give you a little chime and a little haptic feedback on your watch saying it's unlocked it for you. So you don't even have to use the Touch ID on the actual MacBook itself. It'll just unlock, and that's just one of those small things that just makes the whole ecosystem work even better. And it basically just gives you that sort of magical feeling where all of these devices are just constantly talking to each other without you having to do it to basically initiate it. So the next one is AirDrop. So a lot of people, and this is obviously coming back to the ports. So obviously a lot of people have made issues of the fact that you only get two USB-C ports, and that being a major issue for professionals and people that basically want to import external footage. Now, to an extent, I understand that because at the moment, obviously, all I'm using is my iPhone. If I was to go to a dedicated camera, then that would obviously change things. But up until this point, what I've been able to do is import all my footage, any photos, any audio, all those kind of things, literally just sending it straight through AirDrop, and it's worked every time without any problems. So I actually purchased this USB-C adapter thinking that maybe somewhere down the line I'll need to actually plug it in and make use of that in order to import video or something like that. And up until this point, basically I've tested it to make sure it works, and that's it. I've never actually needed to use it for the simple reason that basically I can literally just send everything via AirDrop, and it works so fast and so reliably that I don't need to worry about plugging things in and connecting cables, and all of that just seems pointless at this stage. So that's just something that, once again, it makes the whole ecosystem just work perfectly together. Coming on to the next positive thing for me, and that was the fact that you actually have iTunes built into your Finder. So if you were to actually just plug something in, an iPhone, an iPad or something like that, it literally just pops up here and it'll actually give you iTunes functionality straight built into your Finder without having to actually install the iTunes application separately. I actually had an old iPad that I wanted to just fix up and give to my daughter, and basically I had an issue with the power button on it, so I couldn't actually get it to just restore, because once I got to the reset screen, it wouldn't do anything basically, because obviously it's it's got no home button to actually click through. So because of that, I actually just plugged it into this, and I found that it just came straight up on iTunes or on the Finder, and I was able to do everything that I needed to do with iTunes straight through that. So that's a nice little touch that they've actually got. And coming on to the last sort of positive, and that is Big Sur and the way that it actually looks. I think it is just beautiful in terms of the interface and everything. I've got it set so then it automatically changes the backgrounds once it hits sunset, and just all the control center, your notification center swiping in, your control center, everything here, it just looks really good. So from that point of view, that's something that I really like. Coming from Windows and going back to Windows ME and things like that, and Windows 2000, all of those sort of operating systems. I remember when they first introduced things like your multitask switching and basically mimicking macOS to an extent. But yeah, everything about this, it just looks really good. So that's something I really like. Coming on to the bad points. So the first bad point is something that is both a bad point and also not a bad point. So I'll explain. So it's the heat. So early reviews actually stated that this laptop does not get hot at all. And for 99% of the time, that is true. However, when you're doing any type of video editing, it will heat up. And where it heats up is just around this sort of region here, and on the back likewise. But the one thing is, despite this actually having a fan, and if you look there, it has some exhaust vents just on either side, just there. Despite it having a fan built in, I've only ever heard it twice. The first time was when I first got it, and I was literally installing all my apps, and it basically kicked in, presumably because it was downloading so much stuff in the background, and obviously because it was brand new, I had to have a play about with it constantly. So I think it was literally just a case of I was using it so much that it did actually kick in. So I was actually quite surprised when it did kick in, because obviously I wasn't expecting to actually hear it. And the second time it kicked in was, once again, it was rather strange when it actually kicks in. So during video editing, I have never heard the fan kick in. Also during rendering, it's never kicked in. The second time it kicked in, I was actually having a problem with the Mail app. And basically what I had done, this is probably my mistake, so what I did was I added all my accounts as Google accounts, and it wasn't pulling through Mail. And then I realized, even though you can add them as Google accounts, you still need to add them as Hotmail accounts in order to actually pull through the emails from those particular accounts. So I went in and I was re-adding all of them, and for some reason something wasn't quite working, didn't like something, and I got the beach ball and basically the fan kicked in. So, and it was only for like maybe 10-20 seconds or so. So I've heard the fan twice. So in terms of the heat thing, it doesn't get hot. I would say it warms up to the touch, so you know it's warm. And that's the reason that's a bad point for me, is because I absolutely love the cold feeling that you get from the aluminium when you first open this and on the trackpad. And the good thing is the heat never actually travels down that far. So in terms of your trackpad, it's always that nice freezing cold, kind of cool to the touch feel. So you never get uncomfortable in this sort of area here. The only part that actually warms up is this part, and it's probably also my fault because I'm always using this on my lap, and I've not really used it just on a desk or on a table or something just up to this point, because it is that portable, and because you get full power without it being plugged in, it means that you can literally just take this anywhere and use it. So I've put that down as a bad point, even though for most people, their use cases will probably find that it will never heat up, firstly, because if you're not using it for really intensive tasks, then it doesn't heat up. Like you can watch movies all day long, you can even the actual uploading. So usually when I used to render videos on my iPhone, the rendering used to heat the phone up a lot, but also when I was uploading to YouTube, it would heat up the device a lot as well. I've uploaded 30-minute videos to YouTube using this, and it basically cools down during that period. So I've put it in the bad category just as a side note, more so than anything else. Now, the second one is obviously the fact that the rainbow sort of beach ball thing has popped up on a few occasions when I wouldn't expect it to. So on that occasion with the Mail, I didn't actually have anything else open. So I had everything else closed, and it was literally just the Mail app. So I don't know whether that was just an early bug that was actually causing it to heat up and obviously give me the beach ball slowdown, essentially, the fact that the app wasn't able to perform straight away. Other than that, most things things you throw at it, it just performs really, really good. Okay, so the next one that I've got in the sort of bad section is, it's not so much a complaint or a bad point, but it's the awkwardness in terms of working with iPhone footage, so 10-bit HDR footage. And essentially it's me just being really picky at this point, and the fact that you have to jump through a few hoops in order to make that that footage useful. And I'm the kind of person that I don't like to make compromises when it comes to the outputted file. So for example, most guides that you see on YouTube are teaching you how to take 10-bit HDR footage from Dolby Vision footage from the iPhone and convert it into SDR. And that's the opposite of what I would want to do. I would rather struggle in terms of taking the 10-bit footage and making all of my SDR titles, my SDR B-roll, anything else that I have that I want to add into these particular videos, and making that into HDR, rather than doing it the other way around. The other way around, the way that everybody is teaching you to do it, is faster. It's easier on the MacBook. It'll be done a lot faster. You can set it to higher picture settings and it'll perform flawlessly. But at the end of the day, after all that time, you're left with an SDR image. And at this stage, the fact that we finally got to the point where the iPhone is giving us HDR footage and 10-bit footage, it's the opposite of what I want to do. So I've put it, as I say, I've put it down as a side note, a sort of negative, the fact that yes, you do have to jump through a few hoops. I'm still hoping that Final Cut actually gets something where, yes, you have your HDR tools, and as I said, I'm going to make a separate video on Final Cut Pro. And even though I'm a very, very new user, so literally the 8th of December was when I got this, and we're now on the 23rd of December, and that's the whole time I've had Final Cut Pro. I've never used Final Cut Pro before that, but I've already figured out how to do certain things. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another video on Final Cut Pro where I actually teach you everything I've learned. And hopefully some of you guys out there that have been using it for a lot longer might be able to give me some feedback in terms of possibly some of the things that I might be able to cut down some steps on. Because at the moment there are certain things where, as I said, it's the fact that it's not a one-step thing, so you don't just import it and just click one button. You have to maybe do 2 or 3 things, play about with a few settings in order to get it to do what I want it to do. But it's still a positive, because at the end of all of that, it is capable of giving me what I want, and that is all that matters. After all the editing, after all the rendering, as long as the outputted file is the best it can be, then that is all that really concerns me. Okay, so coming on to the next point, and as I said, this is more so subjective for me. So being a Windows user for all my life, basically, well, I say all my life, not all my life, because when I first started using computers, Windows wasn't actually around, so that should give you an idea in terms of how old I am. But yeah, the first computer, an Amstrad 286 that I used, I believe I was maybe 8 or 9 years old when I first used that. It didn't actually have an operating system on it. It just had MS-DOS prompt. But obviously, for the most part, it's been Windows, and I played about with Linux for a little while until I ran into an issue where I didn't realize they don't actually cap memory and storage in the same way as Windows did. So I ended up in the point where basically my whole PC crashed because I ran out of disk space, and because it could no longer use disk space to actually boot up, it couldn't boot up. So I ended up losing all my data. But one of the things that's kind of annoyed me coming to the MacBook Pro was certain shortcuts wouldn't work in the same way. So for example, to go full screen on MacBook, you have to do Control Command and F. On PCs and Windows laptops, computers, it's always been Alt and Enter. So those kind of little shortcuts, the fact that it's a little bit of a learning curve in terms of just picking up what I want to do again, but the one sort of saving grace for it is also very fast and easy in terms of finding those shortcuts as well. Generally, if you just come to the top menu bar, most things that you want to actually do, you can actually find from just the view or the other options that actually gives you there. Sorry, just realized you can't actually see that, can you? So yeah, just going to the top menu bar here, whatever you want to actually do. So for example, a shortcut in order to go full screen, things like that, you check it once, and then you what I tend to do in terms of muscle memory is, once I find out a shortcut, I will always use that shortcut in order to try and memorize it, basically, and it just helps me remember things so much faster. So yeah, that's, as I say, that's more subjective in terms of me coming from the world of Windows and coming into Mac OS for the first time in terms of personal use, and just trying to figure out all those little shortcuts and things like that. And coming on to the sort of last negative, and that's basically the fingerprints. So I'm not sure how visible it'll be, but the keyboard tends to transfer a lot of fingerprints quite easily. The trackpad and this sort of surface is perfect, but the screen also, I'm not sure if I will have to turn this off. I may have to actually turn this off in order to show you. But bear in mind that I never touch the screens on any of my devices. So just there, you can see it's got this sort of blotchiness just there, and also just in some of the corners. And obviously with it being, with the way that you actually open it, you always end up touching just a tiny bit of this top section just here, because obviously you're touching it from the sort of lip there. That I don't mind so much. It's the marks that actually come on the screen. You can see them just there, this sort of area here, where I've never touched that area of the screen, so I have no idea how that's actually transferred onto it. So yeah, that's basically the last negative. And as I say, that's really clutching at straws and trying to be really nitpicky. So as you can see, in terms of the negatives, is far outweighed by the positives. And really the best way in terms of summary, so we'll come on to the summary now, seeing as we've gone on forever. In terms of the summary, and the best way I can summarize this is, in this past year, I've bought 2 iPhone 12 Pro Maxes, I bought 2 Apple Watches, I've bought the MacBook Pro, and I've placed an order for the AirPods Max. May have missed some other products in there as well. But this MacBook Pro is my favorite product of 2020. So that tells you how much I actually like this particular device. Now, I buy the new iPhone every single year, so I love the iPhone. But this MacBook Pro has enabled me to do things that up until this point I've been cutting corners and doing different tricks in order to try and replicate that without ever actually getting the full experience. This has got to the stage where it's finally a viable option because of both the price point as well as the performance. Pound for pound, I think this is probably the best product of 2020 for me, for all the products that I've actually personally purchased. And that comes on to my final point, which is the spec. So obviously I've gone for the 1 terabyte and the 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, for anybody out there that is looking to purchase one, the same rule applies to every other PC or laptop out there. You always buy the most RAM that you can afford. So if you've got an option of choosing between hard disk space and memory, always go for the memory, and even more so with unified memory, because obviously you can't update it in the future. Now, the good thing about this is, as I said, generally I won't bother with benchmarks and things like that, but what I have done is, during my most intensive rendering projects, I've actually gone onto Activity Monitor and I've checked to see what the levels are, and even at rendering out a 30-minute 4K HDR video with additional titles and everything on top of it, it still never maxed out the RAM. I think the most it got to was 10 gig. So I would definitely recommend the 16 gig, and the fact that it's still got that 6 gig as well as your SSD, which you can then use as well. Probably not at the same speed and probably not to the same efficiency, but it can obviously expand out into the SSD and make use of that as RAM as well. But I would say it gives you that little bit of a window, as most Apple products that I've purchased, the high-end products. So it's the reason why I always go for the highest model Pro Max, or iPhone, because it gives you that extra bit of performance for years to come. And that's a very similar thing with this, where yes, there will be a newer one early next year, a different model. It'll probably have a new design and a new shape, a new screen. It'll probably have a load of other things as well, but it will probably also be more expensive. So for anybody out there that's looking to purchase one of these, 16 gigs I would say is a must, unless you don't use it for any type of intensive tasks. So if you literally just use it for movies, browsing, emails, general spreadsheets, things like that, things that aren't that intensive, then you can get away with 8 gig. But for everybody else, I would recommend, if you can afford 16 gig, get 16 gig. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention was I'm very glad that I went for the 1TB option. And if you do any type of rendering, then you definitely need the 1TB, because some of the project files can get quite big in size. And for that reason, I found that at times, obviously what I tend to do is I have a external NAS drive. Once I've created the project and I've exported it, I don't really need the project file itself. I just need the exported file itself, the rendered file. So what I do is I upload that to YouTube and then back that up to my NAS drive, and then the project file and all the library and everything like that, I just delete it, because all of the individual files I once again keep on that NAS drive. So if I needed to, yes, it would be more time consuming and I would need to rebuild it, but I don't keep the library and I don't keep the project file either, because generally for my channel I don't really need it to that extent. So what I'll do is I'll get rid of all that, and then I'll go back to basically having pretty good amount of storage available. So if we just come into it right now, we can see at this moment in time I have 670 gigabytes available, which, and as you can see the documents, most of that is project files that I've got on the go at the moment. Some of them you will have seen, some of them you won't have seen just yet, but basically once I've created those files, I'll basically just go in and clear all of those, and I'll basically be left with the core sort of apps again and that amount of storage. But yes, the 1TB, if you're doing rendering, I would personally say pay the money and get the 1TB. For me, it's definitely been useful, and without it, I would have ended up having to use proxy files and other things, which for me, I didn't really want to do. I wanted to just use the source files and not have to worry too much about rendering proxy files in the background and other things. I literally just want to get the project done and basically get it exported. So for me personally, yes, the 1TB. For anybody else, I would always recommend the 16 gig worth of RAM. The 1TB is obviously subjective and your use case may not require it, but for anybody rendering files and using Final Cut Pro and things like that, I would definitely recommend the 1TB, even if it's just something that where you can use it whilst you're doing that editing and then obviously offload everything afterwards. You do have the option of obviously using SSDs. I've personally not tried any SSDs with this in terms of the editing side, so I don't know how it performs, whether it's as good as using them straight from the device or whether it's got a bit of a drop off. For me, I don't want those drop frames whilst rendering and editing, so well, not so much rendering, but obviously just the editing portion. So for that reason, obviously I prefer to have everything on the device at the point I'm actually editing, and then once it's done, just offload everything to my NAS drive where I've got tons and tons of storage and I don't need to worry about that. So yeah, that was my review of the M1 MacBook Pro. As I say, my favorite device of 2020, and for anybody out there that's on the fence, literally the only people that I would say wouldn't benefit from this would be somebody who's waiting out for either the 14 or the newer 16-inch. Possibly that might change in size as well, but for anybody out there that's actually waiting for a newer design or something, for me personally, the design and everything like that wasn't really too much of an issue. I love the way this looks, I love the way it feels, I love the way it stays really cool to the touch, apart from when you're doing really intensive tasks. Everything about it I just absolutely love. As I say, my favorite product of 2020.